risk.
Every profit-seeking or power-seeking institution that is created in opposition to something else eventually begins to create the very thing that it claims to oppose in order for it to survive. And we see this in the pharmaceutical industry. It needs sickness and disease in order to survive.
Keeping people sick is indeed a profitable business, and it's something that should be avoided. But to my mind, it's not the problem isn't that it's the for-profit part. The problem is that it's a monopolistic control by the pharmaceutical industry through their sidekicks in the government, what I would call a fatal embrace.
I think the time is coming when Congress is going to have to hear the voice of practitioners and researchers who are pointing out other ways of dealing with health issues other than by writing yet another prescription. Because the fact of the matter is, most of the conditions we're dealing with today, whether it's diabetes or high blood pressure or cancer, high cholesterol levels, these are things where there isn't a single pill that's going to solve the problem. We put a person on pills not for 2 weeks to knock out a pneumonia. We put them on drugs for life to control their cholesterol or control their blood pressure. And it's a gold mine for the drug industry and a rather poor bargain for the patient.
The drug companies are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of healing people. So they look at that drug in terms of a product that's going to bring them profit. And if certain people are harmed, that is just the cost of doing business.
I can be an executive of a Fortune 500 drug company, and I can acquire FDA approval for an agent that may kill people. I can know that there are going to be a certain number of people who will die from this drug. I can introduce it into the market, have those people die. I can never have to answer personally for that decision, even if I violate federal law, even if I commit fraud, even if I violate the rules of the agency. I can still count on the FDA not to hurt my company. I can still count on the FDA to accept a small pittance of the profits that I make from my products in order to continue to do business.
Unlike any other industry in the United States, pharmaceutical companies can literally get away with murder.
Pharmaceutical companies maintain control of the data collected in the clinical trials. They conceal the harm by not publishing the cases where there were bad events, whether it's deaths or heart attacks. Whatever is an adverse event, which means a risk for anyone taking the drug, they cover it up as if it didn't happen. They don't publish it.
So what has happened over the last several decades is that the pharmaceutical industry in particular has become the #1 cause of disease and death in America by poisoning people, essentially, with its toxic chemicals, by weakening people's immune systems and weakening their liver, weakening their neurological functions so that they become future revenue-generating patients.
About half of all of the drugs that are approved for public distribution are quietly recalled within about 5 years because they're too dangerous.
Vioxx has killed at least 60,000 Americans. It caused about 130,000 excess cases of heart attack and strokes. It's one of the most lethal drugs ever approved because it was used by so many people.
The FDA commissioner, looking at his medical reviewers, refused to remove that drug from the market. Then FDA Commissioner Lester Crawford stood by Merck and defended that drug. He also believed that the drug was appropriate for use in pediatric rheumatoid arthritis patients. So he approved it for kids.
The total sales of Vioxx over its period of time it was allowed on the market was over $11 billion. And they had to pay the federal government a $950 million fine. They've paid out about $4 billion in settlements to the victims of Vioxx. But the company is way ahead of the game in their fraudulent marketing of Vioxx.
There are many other drugs that can fall into the category of unsafe drugs that have been approved. Bextra, for example, had heart toxicity risks and ultimately was removed from the market because of those risks, but for many, many years, the FDA kept it on the market.
The company making Bextra, again, covered up the lethal dangers, and they promoted it for uses that it never should have been used for, such as post-surgical pain relief.
Statin drugs have been approved despite the fact that at the time the FDA convened its medical panel, review panel on the statin drugs, the panel at first refused to approve the drug. Well, the unfortunate reality of the drugs is that they block production of an essential energy enzyme, coenzyme Q10, which can lead to heart failure. So here we have again a situation where a drug has been approved to lower your risk of heart abnormalities, that in the end can contribute to heart fatalities.
Katic. It is a drug used as an antibiotic. There's plenty of other antibiotics out there, but Katic, that one caused severe liver damage. FDA had a hint that there was liver damage before the approval, but they approved it anyway. What's really frightening is the clinical study that was done to validate the safety of Katic never occurred. It was done at a clinical research facility that was closed at the time that the alleged study was conducted. But Katic did get approved, and as a result, it killed a lot of people, destroyed their livers, necessitated liver transplants, thereby ruining people's lives. It was something that never should have been allowed on the market, eventually was withdrawn, but it never should have been approved in the first place.
There's one drug, Tracelol. Tracelol was used during heart surgery to prevent some bleeding, to control bleeding. And when they finally found that Tracelol killed about 1,000 people per month, the drug company actually went to a very famous Harvard professor and tried to drown him in money to schmooze things over. Well, the man was so disgusted with that approach, he went public, and Tracelol was taken off the market all over the world. But guess what? Only in the US, the FDA issued a warning. Well, how could we interfere with drug company profits?
Tracelol's withdrawal was delayed for 2 years because the company did everything possible to keep it on the market. They were charging $1,000 per injection. They wanted as many people to be on this drug for as long as possible so they could continue making outrageous profits.
Most of these really terrible drugs are prescribed chronically. They're tested 6 weeks, but they're taken year after year, and that's buildup. When a drug has toxicity, it builds up. Diabetes doesn't happen overnight, although it is frightening the fast speed at which children become diabetic from antipsychotics.
There are several psychotic drugs or antipsychotic drugs that the FDA keeps on the market, despite increased risks of suicidality and despite a substantial amount of evidence of birth defects associated with them. And there's Paxil, Zoloft, Fexor. These drugs and many others that are like them that are serotonin reuptake inhibitors have been shown to lack efficacy. The British health authorities banned the substance for children and for young adults. And in the United States, instead, the best that could be done was a black box warning, so that here in our country, we still make these drugs available to youth and increase the risk of suicidality as a result.
If they had honestly told, GlaxoSmithKline had told parents, say, that what we now know, that taking Paxil is 8 times more likely to cause somebody to commit suicide than taking a sugar pill in the clinical trials, which they knew before the drug was even approved. If you were to tell a parent that, they're not about to give their kid that drug.
This is 911. Who is this? Where is your sister? What is she trying to do? Take pills?
Avandia increases the risk of heart attack. And as a general heart toxin, it has been condemned in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. Despite that fact, FDA's own scientific review panel held it to be a heart toxin, Commissioner Hamburg decided that she would keep it on the market, available to those who are currently using it for precisely those people who are at the greatest risk of a heart attack or other heart abnormality arising from the drug.
Accutane. That was an acne drug that was supposed to be given only in the most severe cases of acne because it was known it had side effects. It caused severe birth defects. They denied that it caused people to commit suicide, but it did. But they were able to keep the warning off of that for many, many years. One congressman, Bart Stupak from Michigan, his son committed suicide at 17. Now these are kids, they weren't diagnosed with depression, they weren't diagnosed with any mental disorder, and they take this acne drug and they commit suicide. And so the drug companies know this, but the FDA knows it too.
When one of the producers of fractionated blood products intended for hemophiliacs realized that their product would kill people because it was contaminated with HIV, you would expect that Baxter would have destroyed the product. They didn't. With the encouragement of the FDA, they sold the product in Europe to hemophiliacs there and infected children with HIV.
This company positively, absolutely knew that they had a medication that was infected with the AIDS virus. They took the product off the market in the U.S. and then they dumped it in France, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. So they made a huge profit. By the way, Joe, government officials in France that allowed that to happen actually had to go to prison for it. In America, not one corporate executive for this company has been indicted or even criminally investigated by our Justice Department.
Why not? And if you've ever wondered why a terminally ill cancer patient is given lots of chemotherapy almost up until the point that they're dying or dead, it's because the economic incentive is there to continue putting chemotherapy into cancer patients who have no chance whatsoever of benefiting from it. In each and every case when we tried to recruit a mainstream oncologist, the question they asked us is, what is your chemotherapy bonus structure? I was unaware of this back in the year 2000. I asked them, well, what do you mean by that? They said, well, our pay is based on how much chemotherapy we prescribe. That's where our profit center is. And if we don't have a strong chemotherapy reimbursement incentive, we'll find a cancer center that will give us a strong chemotherapy bonus.